Hi, I'm Robert Steed with Mountain America's Financial Education Team, and I'm excited to spend a few moments with you members of the PTA and address some things that pertain to personal financial management as well as your assignments within the PTA. The topic that we're going to be covering today is called, the presentation is Brains, Budgets, and Technology. And by the end of our 30 minutes together, we're going to be able to understand a few things hopefully better and the way that they can assist us in improving our personal and nonprofit assignment financial situations. First, we're going to make sure we understand how the brain actually works in the decision-making process. This can hopefully help us make better decisions, more efficient, and as well as maybe better even collaboration. We might be able to recognize some things about ourselves and others as we're working through these processes. We'll also make sure to understand cognitive biases and the way that they play a role in our interactions, communications with ourselves and with others, and especially as we're making personal financial decisions. This will help us rethink ROI, our returns on investment, maybe to do so with a little bit more meaning. And then we'll be able to bring in the money. Once we've got that framework, that decision-making framework in place, then we'll bring in the money and actually demonstrate how technology can be a very useful tool in maintaining accountability to those decisions that we've made. So first, let's start off with the brain. Many of us don't realize that the brain, despite its very complex nature, is actually very simplistic in its functioning. Our brain processes things and labels experiences in one of really only two ways. Things that we experience on a day-to-day basis are either threatening or rewarding. Not always super rewarding or super threatening, but on that scale is kind of the way we tend to label things. If we got too much more complicated than that, we might feel a little bit of overload, believe it or not. The problem is that our brain defaults to threat. Now, we see this in financial experiences quite often. We are sitting, and I should say marketers, right? They recognize, as salespeople understand that our brains default to a threatened state of experience. And so that's why sales happen so often. Actually, sales could probably play into the reward or threat, but oftentimes we might find ourselves wanting to purchase something, and we find ourselves in a sale experience, right? We're in the store, we see the sale, and we think, oh, we start to feel that threat. We're gonna miss out on an opportunity for a deal. We're not gonna be able to accomplish our financial goal unless we do it this way. Also, we could get into that reward situation where, if we don't do it, if I don't purchase this right now, I'm not gonna be as efficient or as effective, or I'm saving money by spending money. We get ourselves into that thought. We see how this threat and reward functionality exists, particularly in personal finances. When working with another person to make a financial decision, same thing can occur. We can either feel very rewarded or very threatened as we begin to communicate with each other, as we present ideas. And depending on how we react with each other, financial planning meetings are especially this way, because money is so symbolic and it's so essential to everything that we do, especially within a business function. That ideas being put down or the way we communicate, now suddenly we might find ourselves widening this chasm almost, somebody feeling threatened and continuing to go down that threatened rabbit hole and unable to recover to the point where they can begin to make decisions that are beneficial to the organization. This threat reward mentality is important to understand because this is the way we label experience. But going beyond that, to make a decision within those experiences, it can also be tricky because our brain has two decision-making centers, two decision-making pathways, and one operates much more quickly than the other. We might call the one that operates more quickly our caveman brain. It's the emotional brain. It's the brain that acts unconsciously. It's very fast and involuntary. These are not emotions that you are choosing to feel necessarily. This is that fight or flight kind of kicks in. It's especially prevalent in the threatening experience. It's also prevalent in the reward. We sometimes get down that reward rabbit hole, like I mentioned. Maybe we think of a good idea and we just keep going with it and going with it and going with it and building it up bigger and bigger and bigger. And now that emotion that's attached to this this reward center discussion is just ballooning it out of proportion. So this emotional caveman brain is meant to react quickly and to push things forward, to make action occur. That can be a good thing in many cases, but often if we allow it to dominate, then our rational brain, our rational decision-making route doesn't have an opportunity to really kick in. This is the, relatively speaking, again, these are milliseconds, these decision-making routes. Relatively speaking, this is more of the slow, controlled, rule-following decision portion of our brain. And so we need to make sure that we've got a way to enable our rational brain to kick in as we're having these financial discussions, both with ourselves, with spouses, with children, as we're trying to teach them about money, helping them understand how they experience these things as well, and within our own PTA assignments. Key to understanding this and making sure that we kind of conquer this emotional default is an understanding of cognitive biases. Now, biases, we're very familiar with the term bias, and how they form, though, and really the danger that they might play in financial decision making comes because we all operate to a degree, healthily, in that emotional center. And these are called heuristics. We follow rules of thumb, trusting our gut. This is where we can make good decisions. In many cases, they have had good results, and so that's why we kind of trust that default rule in any given circumstance if we need to act quickly. The problem is that when we become too fully reliant on those heuristics, now we lock in an emotional decision-making process. That's when it becomes a bias. And that's when we start to have problems in our planning, in our communication with others, and the way we manage finances. And so some of these, let's introduce some of these biases. The first one, that there's many of them, but a few of the basic ones that are readily recognizable within each of us. The first one would be the availability bias. And this is where we place excess weight on the information that's readily available. And the picture here might seem, what does this have to this is the thought that comes to my mind. I remember growing up in elementary school, going through what was called the DARE program. And we would often talk about, drug use and tobacco and avoiding these kinds of things and how bad they were for you. And I always remember, no matter the class, some kid, maybe it was the same kid, I don't know, it's been 30 years. Some kid would always raise his hand and say, hey, I know my grandma or grandpa or great uncle smokes and they're 94, right? They place too much weight on something that's readily accessible to their mind. And it causes us sometimes to ignore other data or ignore other opportunities. Confirmation bias, there's a little bit of overlap here. This is where we tend to seek for information that confirms what it is that we already believe or want to do or feel comfortable with. That's another key. These biases keep us within a comfort zone that can often inhibit progress. And you can see this here, right? We see this all the time. We feel like we've listened to both sides of an argument and we're going to do our own research, and then boom, the first link that agrees with what it is that we already believe, that's a legitimate one. I found it. I knew it. I was right. And so financially speaking, this is, well, let's go through these and we'll kind of see how this applies as well with a familiarity bias. And we'll start to see these really starting to play out in some of the examples here. Familiarity bias is maybe a step beyond even availability and confirmation. It's even more of an expression of those two things. A familiarity bias is where we really tend to give excessive weight or authority to things that we're already familiar with. So we've had this information available and readily coming to mind, and we keep bringing it to mind, and then we confirm it through our own research, seeking for those things that establish its veracity. And then we begin to express that through the things that we're familiar with, and continue to lean heavily on that. I have an example on here of these pictures of the chairs. Malcolm Gladwell, in one of these books right here, he wrote about this experience where Herman Miller, was a company in 1993, started making this chair that to people looked like it was from an alien spaceship. And as they ran tests on it, and people were like, this is so much more comfortable than what we're used to. But as soon as they would launch the product in a certain area, even after the tests in that area were very successful, people wouldn't buy it. It was just too alien. It was too strange. And what they were familiar with, and what had been the case in the past, is that the more plush and leathery and grommeted the chair was, that represented a nice office chair. Now, obviously, some things occurred to tip it. I believe it was the tipping point where this was written about. And now, we in offices around the country, and I'm assuming many places in the world, we don't see the plush leather anymore. We see these, well, what I'm sitting on, the skeleton type chair, right? And so the key, maybe a key sentence here is, and this is where I say this can get in trouble with within your own PTA assignments, these conversations, the decisions that you're making financially to fundraise. Well, we've always done it this way, right? This is what we're familiar with. Personally, financially, it might be, well, I drive by that bank every day. It must be the best one. I've always invested in this, or I remember a couple of financial books by this particular author. It's this familiarity that we rely too heavily on. And really probably that key phrase, both personally as well as in any kind of organization, is, well, we've always done it this way. That's an expression of availability. This is the idea that's available to my mind. Familiarity, I'm comfortable with it. And then I rely on past success to confirm that it really is the best option. And so we get stuck in these emotional cycles, this emotion of comfort. One other bias to introduce and to get you thinking is this overconfidence or excessive optimism. All right, if any of you have ever seen the movie Napoleon Dynamite, Uncle Rico is probably the epitomization of this. Man, if Coach would have put me in 1982, we'd have been state champs. I could have won the game. It was all on me. This idea that we have maybe more control over a situation than we actually do. I've seen this a few times in the past, working with some small businesses, for example. We're good. We can get by without some really detailed accounting. We've always kind of made it through, we just kind of reconciled at the end. There's always these kinds of things. I'm good without a budget, personal finance. I've always been able to make it through. I just kind of wing it. We're good. Part of the problem with this is that there's also something called the fading affect bias that really kind of fits in this overconfidence, is that the further away we get from a particular experience, we tend to remember it in a slightly more rosy light, right? We default to threat, but over time we try and eliminate threat, that fight or flight. Believe it or not, over time, our brain is still flying, so to speak, away from that negative experience, that threatening experience. And so we tend to default to making our past experiences a little bit more rewarding than maybe they actually were. And so we find ourselves, these biases are important to recognize in any kind of financial discussion, financial planning, personally, as well as within a PTA assignment. And it's once we get this process down and understand just how we are making financial decisions, in order to maybe supersede that, we have to get something that's even more powerful, something that can kick us out of that emotional situation. That's where we come to this idea of rethinking ROI, rethinking returns on our investment. Oftentimes we're very driven by the idea of, I can get a 10% return here, or I can get a higher return here, or more efficiency with my money here. And while that's often good, it's not always better or best. And that's generally the way that is most healthy to think about financial situations. Not necessarily in this idea of right or wrong. Is it right to do it this way or wrong to do it this way with our money? But more of a what's good, what's better. Is there something that's best? That is one mentality that I've found in the personal counseling sessions, financial counseling sessions that I've done, or education, that if people can get there, oftentimes some of the biases begin to be shed, because instead of this idea of, well, no, my way is the right way, it's, yeah, that's good, but I could also see value in this one. And so now we're starting to evaluate, okay, maybe it's not right or wrong. Maybe it really is an idea of, is there one that's better than the other? And so as we're rethinking returns on investment, what this looks like is we really need to begin not necessarily with what we've always done, but with what's the ideal experience here? What's the ideal self that we're seeking for? What's the ideal organization? What's the ideal PTA chapter for this region? What does it provide? What do we need? And when you get to that key value up at the top, then you start to brainstorm goals. You know, we've always done it this way, but really we're starting to find that there's a need here. Personal finance, it's the same thing. What's really driving me? Why I don't feel successful doing things the way we've always done it? What's maybe out of sync? It's called dissonance, when we're doing something that's not actually in alignment with what's most meaningful to us. We're experiencing cognitive dissonance. And if any of you are musicians, you know dissonance. It's that grinding and grating when two wavelengths don't fit. And to resolve that, you have to create harmony and realign it. Same thing with financial management and planning. And so you start with that idea, well, what's really needed? And maybe the way it's always been done is what fits the bill and what gets you where you need to go. But it's always helpful to sometimes reevaluate that. And then you just start brainstorming, listing, without worry about particular dollars or cents. List everything down and then start to organize it by level of importance. And then attach the numbers, and you'll start to see budgets materialize. You'll start to see agreement between spouses or partners, or even with yourself, as you start with this thing that's most important and begin to tie your money management and your fundraising and everything towards the things that you know are the most valuable. This allows you to really start to get 100% return on your investment, so to speak, with your finances and your financial management. Personally and within an organization, if you know that you are taking on just enough risk to get just the right return to match your values and goals, and you're accomplishing those values and goals, as soon as that accomplishment has occurred, 100% return, right? That's what we were thinking. It's not just about growth or comparison of different, I could have been in that market, or I could have been in that CD, and had I known about this financial institution, or, had we done what this other PTA had done, we might have gotten more money. I mean, honestly, who's going to ever complain about more money, right? But the idea is that often that comparison, that seeking simply for the higher return on investment, often leads to feeling of discontent and a lack of accomplishment. And now you're back in the threatening mindset, and you're experiencing maybe some establishment of biases. When you're completely focused on the goal, you're measuring risk and rewards against yourself, against what's most meaningful to you. And now you're getting that higher return on investment. Now, once we've got this in place, notice we haven't talked about dollars and cents so much at all. This is what's called behavioral finance. It's something that's making a little bit more of a push in the financial industry. And it's something that I've seen and my coworkers have seen in the hundreds, almost 1,000 plus financial counseling appointments that we've done over the last few years with individuals, and having done a little bit with small business in the past, I've seen this with them as well. This kind of clarity is what gives definition to financial success within a PTA chapter, within a personal financial plan. It's got to be very clear. And then we can begin to implement the principles that haven't changed for years. Budgeting is not a very exciting financial topic because it doesn't change much. There's just these consistent principles, and if we find that we're not sticking to them, then we feel like failures. But I shouldn't laugh at that, but we do. Everybody does. It's a very common experience. And so if we go back a step before we start implementing the principles and understand this core foundation of values, goals, and decision-making processes, then budgeting really becomes a manner of implementation and accountability. And technology can play a huge role in that. In fact, probably the key element to a successful budget really is accountability. You've got to create a way to stick to and measure against those core goals, values, and directions. And if you can't create that accountability, then budgets are always you're always going to wonder, right? Budgets are never going to be clear. They're always going to feel burdensome. And it's going to be hard to measure success. So knowing accountability is really what we're seeking for in any kind of budgeting process. Let's talk about technology. Technology has come a long way. Back when I was in school, and I don't feel like it was that long ago, but again, it's been a while. Since I was in high school, and I remember getting my first accounts, right? Getting really excited to have that debit card with my name on it. Man, that pumped me up. And I remember I had one checking and one savings account. That's what we did. And we did that because anytime we needed to make a transfer, we had to go to the branch. If we wanted to cash a check, or not cash a check, deposit a check, we had to go to the branch. If we wanted to open up a new account, you had to go to the branch. And so we almost have had this implicit learning. It's been passed on from parents to children implicitly. It's just what we do. Yeah, I just had one savings, maybe two savings account, a money market, and another, and a CD or something. But this implicit learning continues to pass these good financial behaviors on, but often eliminating the ability to get to the best ones. And so for personal finances, what we're looking at is one way to create this accountability is you create multiple savings accounts and maybe even more than one checking account to begin to manage this and create accountability. You name them, and you're creating two types of accounts. You're creating accounts that help you plan for what's called the certainty of uncertainty, those things that you know are coming, you're just not sure when, right? The car maintenance, the home maintenance, the job loss, the 3 months emergency, the yearly costs that always sneak up on you, the car registration, insurance, rec center memberships. And so you're creating these things and you're setting up automatic transfers to them. And so that the day you get paid, money is coming out of your check and immediately going where it needs to first, so you're not tempted to spend it, so you don't make an accident with the money management. And because these accounts are named, that creates a level of accountability. If you want to spend more money that's in your checking account, you have to pull up your phone, which is most of our banks now, our branches, credit union or bank branches, and you have to transfer money and you have to decide where. And if you're transferring out of the accounts that are preparing you for the uncertainty, well, now you're putting some other financial goals in jeopardy. You know, in case you do lose your job or the car breaks down. But then you've got these other accounts as well that are the definition of your financial success. Vacation, projects, toys, and you've named them. No, not just projects, but like Hawaii or new bathroom or whatever. And now you've got to decide, man, do I transfer do I put Hawaii in jeopardy for this momentary spend that I want to make? And so it creates that accountability. And with the automation of the transfers, the money's going where it needs to go first. You're accomplishing your goals without biases getting in the way, without that emotion or without that threatening feeling of having to transfer money away from your spending. For businesses, possibly for PTA chapters, there's ways to do some very similar things. You can create multiple accounts for maybe multiple projects. You've done some fundraising for particular projects and you're trying to split it up, whatever it might be. Name the accounts, and you're also creating transactional histories and recording where you can go back and see where you're pulling money from before you spend it. Yeah, okay, we're ready to spend on this particular event after this fundraiser, so let's go transfer the money from that particular project account. It's a way to begin that accounting process. And it creates, again, that same informational clarity and emotional accountability. If that seems a little uncomfortable or a little unwieldy, I'm not exactly sure who you've got as your treasurer or how comfortable they might feel with technology. But there are some other things that could be useful. If you're looking for ways to still use technology for accounting and effective transparency and accountability, there are other things, API connections, where you can pull transactional data automatically into accounting software if you're feeling really good about that, and if your particular chapter, or I'm sure that the state level uses accounting software and are probably familiar with it, where you can pull that transactional data and begin to label it and account for things. There are dependable tools that I've used in the past for small businesses that can do that same kind of a thing, where they can take your financial login and they will download automatically at a certain interval that you specify the transactional data into a spreadsheet, Google Sheets or an Excel sheet that you've designated, and now it's bringing it in automatically and you're able to account for it. You can do something very similar if you've never done this, where you can actually download that transactional data into what's called a CSV file, where it'll import it into Excel or Google Sheets or Numbers if you're a Mac person, and you can then begin to manipulate that data and account for it and make reports and create accountability again for your particular budgeting, and it's all connected to your more effective decision-making process. You've clarified where it is you're going and what's most applicable for you, either personally or in your particular chapters. And now everything that you're doing and everything that you're spending and this technology is really just allowing you to maintain accountability to that particular plan, and doing so in a way that's not prohibitive. It's automatic in many cases, and so it's instant. It's automatic accountability and insight as to where it is you're going and where you stand in relationship to your goals. So to review, we've got this progression: brains, budgets, and technology. We begin with the brains. Make sure that you reflect on your money conversations. Think back as to how your planning sessions have gone, personally as well as within your chapter, and evaluate your decision-making processes. How does it go? Are there things that you can recognize? Are there threats? Are people feeling threatened, or do you get a little too far down the reward rabbit hole? In doing that, you're going to start to identify some possible biases, some leanings, some over-reliance on certain decision-making techniques. You might recognize, well, this is the way we've always done it, and it's always been successful, which again might be the case, but it might be helpful to reevaluate that as well. Okay? To rethink that ROI, orient more towards meaning, okay? Towards the things that fit your needs and fit your chapter needs, and you adapt to the changing circumstances that you might be in. From there, do what you need to do to create accountability to the decisions that you've made. And use technology. Technology can be so helpful in automating that accountability process. And that's probably part of the key. We all have a limited resource inside of us. Psychologists have found it's called willpower. We've probably all heard of it, but it works like a physical muscle. It can exhaust itself through extreme bursts of use or over time, right? Like a marathon runner. Both a sprinter and a marathon runner are exhausted by the end of their race. And willpower works the same way. So this automation, this technological automation and accountability can often help ease the burden on our individual willpower. So you see a little QR code down there. If any of you have questions, that QR code leads to actually a scheduler where I would love to sit down. We do that financial counseling. It's at no cost. You don't have to be a Mountain America member. I can't open accounts. And so there's opportunities for you to talk maybe through some of these things with me, and where we can sit down at no cost for an hour at your convenience if that's something that you might find useful. If not, ignore it and go on your way, and go seek to better understand your individual decision-making processes and how it's been impacting your financial success, either professionally, individually, within your volunteering, within the PTA. Thank you again so much for letting me spend a little bit of time with you, and I look forward to hearing and seeing some of the successes as you read about all of the different things that the PTA is doing to benefit the lives of children. So thank you for your work, and thanks for letting me be a part of it.